All right. Hi, everybody. How we doing? Everybody good out there? Good. Thank you for tuning in with us. My name is Ryan Collins. I am the Executive Director of the Midwest Writing Center. I have the great privilege tonight of introducing one of my favorite writers and favorite people, Lyz Lenz. And I also have the privilege of working on the writing conferences, which is one of my favorite events that we do here at the Writing Center every year. Um, yeah, before we get going, just a couple things. We want to thank our sponsors. A lot of people help make this happen. I don't know if any of them have done more than Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for being so awesome and terrific. Not just for the conference, but we run an internship program called the Young Emerging Writers Summer Internship Program. She's been helping me run that. I would be completely lost out here in the internet sphere without her. So thank you, Sarah, for all the work that you do on this and for the center, for all the interns all the time. You're fantastic, and we really appreciate you. We also want to thank the sponsors of the conference. We've been really fortunate. This is the 15th year that we've done the David R. Collins Writers Conference. Every one of those years, Modern Woodmen of America has sponsored this program. This year was especially with everything going on. It was especially great that they could support us, and they're supporting the YEW program. They're supporting some other things that we're doing. So we're very grateful for Modern Woodmen and their support over the last 15 years. We also want to thank the Regional Development Authority for their grant support for this program. We also want to thank Illinois Humanities. We were awarded a special emergency grant from them earlier this spring that's helping to make all this happen too, so we really appreciate them. We want to thank the Illinois Arts Council Agency. They have been a longtime supporter of ours, pretty much ever since we incorporated and got a physical location. They've been right there with us, so we're very grateful for the Illinois Arts Council Agency. We want to thank St. Ambrose University and the English department there. Normally, that's where the conference would be. They've been outstanding hosts. Part of the reason we were kind of late with information on how we were going to do all this is we were holding out hope we might be able to do something there. They were really great working with us and trying to get to some place where we could try to do some kind of hybrid conference or something, but it just didn't end up working out. So we hope very much to be back there next year. We appreciate their understanding and their working with us and all the support they've given us over all these years. We also want to thank the Figge Art Museum, which is a fantastic resource in the Quad Cities for those of you tuning in from outside the area. This event would have been in the John Deere Auditorium, where we do a lot of readings and events. It's a fantastic space. It's a fantastic museum. We really appreciate Melissa Moore, the Director of Education over there. She's worked with us on a ton of events, and we really wanted to be there, but obviously it wasn't a thing. So we want to shout them out. We also want to shout out Rostock's, which is a great venue, coffee shop, kind of A1 cultural space in the Quad Cities. We wouldn't be as great as we are without them. The faculty reading, which is tomorrow at this very same time, it will be happening in this very same format, was going to be at Rostock's. So tomorrow when the faculty's reading, we're going to ask everybody to support them a little bit if you can, because usually you'd be there, eat food, having drinks, doing a reading, but alas, we are here, which is great because Lyz is also here. And I'm so excited to hear her talk. When we started talking about our 15th anniversary of the conference, one of the things that we wanted to do was invite people who, conference participants in past years, have really enjoyed their workshops, who love their work. And Lyz was at the top of this list. Really, all of our instructors this year were all, that was the top of the list, and we got everybody, so we were really fortunate. But I wanted to ask Lyz to do this keynote. If you've been keeping up with her columns at the Gazette, Cedar Rapids Gazette, I think it's some of the sharpest thinking and some of the most necessary writing that's going on probably really anywhere right now. And it just seemed like a perfect fit. She's been here the last 2 years, and people love her work. So we're so grateful to have her back here. Lyz has a book coming out called Belabored, A Vindication of the Rights of Pregnant Women. It'll be out later this summer for Bold Type Books. Pre-order is up. This is a book you want to run out and get because it's fantastic. Much like her first book, Godland, which came out last year, which was equally fantastic. I'm not going to read her bio because I don't know, maybe that's kind of lame, and Lyz is anything but lame. So her work has appeared anywhere of consequence, I think, in American Letters, Huffington Post, New York Times, Columbia Journalism Review, Pacific Standard. I could spend a lot of time naming off all the amazing places that her work has appeared, and it should, because her work is amazing. Not only is she a great a crafter of sentences, not only is her writing funny and heartbreaking and thought-provoking, which are all the things that I think that I love about literature and that I turn to in any kind of writing. But I think the thinking that it reflects is equally wonderful and necessary and important. So I'm going to turn it over now. It's my great pleasure to welcome our friend and our keynote speaker, Lyz Lenz. Lyz, take it away, please.
Hi guys, or people, humans. Thank you all for coming and zooming in tonight. I am so sad we're not in person. I'm sure everybody is sad about not being in person, but I am happy that this is still going, and I'm happy we get to connect even in this way. This conference, this will be my third year at the conference, and Ryan has been so kind to me since I guess since I've been a writer in Iowa, and having him invite me to teach at the conference has just been really a wonderful way to help me build community here in Iowa, but also just been an incredible support. I think that first year he invited me, he saved my life with the money that I was given. Like, it paid my rent that month, and it was like, and so I just can't stress how important it is that conferences like these are. Not only do they help support community, not only do they help support new voices and new writers, but they also just help support in this big and beautiful way. So thank you for being part of this, and for being part of this vision. And thank you for having me. I really cannot say just how wonderful each time I've come to this conference has been. All right, enough of the feelings talk. Nobody wants to hear that. I think before we start with the talk, which is titled Writing for Change, we should address the big, everything that's going on in the world, very specifically that the Pentagon released video footage of the UFOs. I think that's all very important. I'm just kidding. I know there's a revolution going on. I know there's a pandemic going on. I know people are dying, and I know we're all getting together in this like really weird format of Zoom to somehow come together and somehow talk about change and writing and meaning. And it's really overwhelming. Writing this talk was really, really, really overwhelming to me in a way that I'm experiencing a feeling now, but that I felt really inadequate for. I don't know what really to say. So I decided to do what my mom always taught me to do: put on some lipstick, look fancy, and tell some stories. So we're going to start with a story. This story is the story of why I wanted to start writing. So I did not always want to be a writer. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be powerful. I wanted to wear really nice suits, have an amazing apartment, and make a lot of money. I do none of those things. I did not achieve that goal. But I wanted to be just like my dad. My dad is a lawyer, and I always saw him as powerful and free. And that's what I wanted to be too. In college, I joined the newspaper, partially because it sounded really cool, and I got work study money. The first story I was assigned was to write about a controversy over the Greek rush that year. I think it was underage drinking. I don't really remember. It's probably just, take out your bingo card and pick a couple things that dumb frat boys do, and that was it. Now, I have to explain. Before high school, I was homeschooled, and I wasn't particularly cool in high school. So, as you can imagine, And I had no idea what Greek life was. I didn't know what a fraternity was. I had no idea. I just thought they were like groups of people. I literally had to learn what Rush was while I was writing this story. And so I had no idea the culture. I didn't know what I was getting into. And that stupid editor also didn't prepare me. In hindsight, she should have told me. She should have told me what was coming for me. But what she saw in me was somebody eager and vicious. And so she let me have at it. And in hindsight, I hate her for it. But it's okay because I won. Because the last time I Googled her, she was knee deep in a pyramid scheme. That's my petty moment for the night. So in my ignorance, I rushed around talking to people about the controversy. I got some really great quotes. I put it all together, and it was the cover story. The college newspaper was very much print in those days. We barely even worked on computers. And that's not because I'm so old, it's just because that's how behind my college was. Probably both things are true. So the paper came out Friday mornings, and on Fridays, students would trickle into the cafeteria for food and grab the paper and read it while nursing hangovers. That Friday, my freshman year, 1 month into my time as a college student, I walked into the cafeteria and saw a whole room of people absolutely pissed at me. I mean, they were mad. I remember one guy standing up, waving the paper, yelling, "Can you believe this bullshit?" Another man stood on a chair. I call them men, they were boys. Stood on a chair and yelled, "This dumb bitch." It didn't take me long to realize they were talking about my story. I stood in the doorway before I turned around and snuck downstairs to the student union to get breakfast from the coffee shop. I was so scared, but I also had never felt more powerful in my entire life. A room full of people had read my words and it had moved them. I grew up one of 8 kids, homeschooled and evangelical, in a culture that didn't value my voice. I was one of many kids, one of many needs. I was taught that the best version of myself meant being silent and being submissive. Walking into that cafeteria and then turning the fuck around immediately made me feel like just for a moment that what I had said was important, that who I was important. In those 4 years working at the paper, I learned that if you wrote something and wrote it well, people would pay attention, that people would read you, and they'd talk about your words. I'd never been taken so seriously. I had professors coming up to me expressing frustration or excitement about my stories and ideas. Once in class, a poli-sci major, it's always the poli-sci majors, quoted me back to me. It was a thrill. Okay, now I want to tell you another story. In 2016, I began a diary. After 10 years of marriage and half of those 10 years spent in therapy, things were not good and I didn't know what to do. So I did the only thing I know how to do. I opened up a Word document and began writing. I didn't have the energy to write what I was feeling, so I made notes of my day. I had 2 small children. All I wanted to do was just be a writer, and none of those things were working. I was exhausted. My marriage was falling apart. America was falling apart, and I had no career. So I just made notes. I would get up, take my kids to preschool, come home, cry, do my marketing work, and make notes. I couldn't even write my feelings. All I said was what I ate, what I drank, what we fought over, things that went missing, things that I found, the things that my children cried over, the things that I cried over. I kept this going for several months until one day I opened it up and read the whole thing. 8 months worth of notes. And that was the day I decided I needed a divorce. Every time I second-guessed myself, every time someone told me it wasn't that bad, that I was overreacting, I'd look at the words I'd written, my record, and I would remember. That was not a thrill. I blew my life up because of those words. And those words were the narrative that changed me. They were a record of reality that I didn't even have the courage to articulate. Those words will never be published. Writing can change the world. It can change our entire world or just your own small world. Putting truth down on paper can just change everything. Now, let me tell you another story. A writer I know, I'm so privileged to know her, Pamela Koloff, who works with ProPublica, got a man named Joe Bryan freed from jail after she wrote his story and spent over a year collecting and analyzing the evidence that put him there. Not only did she get him free, but she changed a whole field of forensic science just by her relentless pursuit of truth and putting it all together in a beautiful narrative. And now here's another story. It's about a man who tweets lies every day from his home, the White House. His words run our nation. His racism drives our policy, and people are dying because of the narrative that he spins. All this man has are words. He doesn't have the money he says he has, nor the support he believes he has. He has certainly not made anything great again, but his words, his unchecked words, they've brought us here. Words can change the world for good or evil. Right now in America, we are in a war of words that is costing people their lives. Whether it's a pandemic or revolution, or a president whose unchecked power and greed has resulted in the deaths of innocent men and women on the border at the hands of the police, or as a result of a deadly virus. In the Book of Laughter and Forgetting, but people who've taken my class before know that I always talk about Milan Kundera, and so I'm going to talk about Milan Kundera. Milan Kundera describes a picture of a Czechoslovakian communist leader, Klement Gottwald, standing near Vladimir Klementis, a politician and writer. 4 years after the photo was taken, Klementis was charged with treason and hanged. His image was removed from the photograph. The only part of him that remains was the large fur hat now on Gottwald's head. Kundera writes about that image, the real struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. In Memory and Imagination, Patricia Hampel writes that it is the habit of nations and those in power to deny the truth of memory in order to disarm moral and ethical power. She continues, beauty of memory rests in its talent for rendering detail, for paying homage to the senses, its capacity to love the particles of life, the richness and idiosyncrasy of our existence. The function of memory, while experienced as intensely personal, is surprisingly political. Right now, America is in a revolution, not because of racism, but because racism got caught, because of video technology and cell phones and data, because of people tracking the truth in that computer type of Word document, the truth that we have all known but so rarely seen, that Black people in America have been telling us about over and over and over. Well, now we see it and we can't be gaslit. We can't wish it away with words like, well, he was no angel, or shouldn't have resisted arrest. In 2019, I profiled a man who called himself the master of spin. His name is Michael Citrick, and he is one of the founders of modern PR and spin. And he's worked with people like Alan Dershowitz, R. Kelly, and Harvey Weinstein, a real collection of amazing men in America. Just kidding, they're assholes. If you read Citrick's books, and I'm sorry to tell you, I did read his books, you can see how he sowed doubt into otherwise truthful stories, because he'd repeat over and over to the journalists writing these stories. He'd say, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?" He'd make writers and editors doubt themselves to the point where they'd pull a story or a damning detail about somebody who was bad. Our stories are political. Our memories are political. The truth is political, and when we hold on to it and when we tell it, we can change the world. Words are the most powerful tool of citizens in a regime that seeks to erase our existence. We write to make it known that we are here. We write to make a personal accounting of who we are and a face of a power that wants to erase us, or that hears our stories and says, "Are you sure?" For much of American history, people of color were not allowed to be witnesses in courtroom trials. If 1,000 Black people saw a white man murder someone else before their eyes, they would not have been allowed to testify against him. I didn't know about this until recently, when I heard the historian Jill Lepore talk about it on her podcast. She explains that it was about credibility, or so the court said for so many years, because how could you trust a Black person? The Equal Protection Clause worked to give people of color their right to say in a court of law what happened. And I think about that a lot, the power to sit before a judge and tell your story, your narrative, what you saw, your eyewitness truth, and how for so long in America, we denied people that fundamental right. Because the reality is we live in a country of competing narratives. There's the narrative that wins and the one that is forced silent. Who gets to sit on that stand and tell their story? That's a political act. What happens to us, and our right to speak out about what happens to us, is also a political act. And when we say the truth of our lives and our bodies, and when people listen, change can happen. People like to ask me which writers inspire me. And of course, there are a lot of writers whose words just seem to flow off the page. I admire Gia Tolentino, Molly Ivins. I admire Pamela Koloff, Kiese Lehman, Dr. Tressie McMillan Cotton. I admire so many writers. But the reason I love coming to this conference every year is because the writers I admire the most are you all. I admire the writers who aren't yet famous, or maybe you don't even want to be famous. You just want to tell your story. But you're desperate and you're dedicated to making a record of your life and your truth. You are the ones who are keeping the list, who are holding on fast to what you are and who you say you are. The writers I admire the most are you, sitting in your rooms and homes, doing your best to spin a true narrative, one that is beautiful, and one that is filled with hope and justice and passion. You are fighting for your life through words. If you've taken a class with me before, you've heard me read this quote, that in her book, Emergent Strategy, Adrienne Marie Brown explains that before all else, we are creatures of imagination and story. We are in an imagination battle, she writes. Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown, Renisha McBride, and so many others are dead because in some white imagination they were dangerous. And that imagination is so respected that those who kill based on an imagined radicalized fear of Black people are rarely held accountable. Imagination has people thinking they can go from being poor to millionaire as part of shared American dream. Imagination turns brown bombers into terrorists and white bombers into mentally ill victims. Imagination gives us borders, gives us superiority, gives us race as an indicator of capability. I often feel, she writes, I am trapped inside someone else's imagination, and I must engage my own imagination in order to break free. The limits of our stories are the limits of our lives. Our words should open up the world, not close it off. Our words should include all people and not trap them in cages on the border. I see every story, every word, whether it's published or not, as a struggle of memory against forgetting, as a struggle of nuance in the flat face of fascism. When Pamela Koloff writes about blood spatter, or Doreen St. Felix writes about music, or when the woman who submits an essay to Submittable about her rape, and the editor replies, "I'm so sorry, but we can't publish this." But she keeps writing anyway, fighting to know the narrative of her life. No story is wasted. No story is told in vain. When I started coming to this conference, I was the editor of a website called The Rumpus. I no longer do that because I have to make money and get health care, but I loved it. It was one of the best times of my life, and it's still a beautiful, beautiful website. So on that website, there was a very wonderful column called Dear Sugar, and was written by Cheryl Strayed, who told a writer named Alyssa Desist to write like a motherfucker. Alyssa has been writing like a motherfucker. Since then, she's written some incredibly beautiful and funny and passionate writing. I've seen her write about some horrible things that have happened to her, and I have heard, well, I haven't seen them, but she's told me about other things that have happened to her, but she keeps writing and she keeps telling her truth. And in all those years I've known her, she's always been writing like a motherfucker. Her words are in the Not That Bad anthology, edited by Roxane Gay. And Alyssa keeps writing, and so do we. Writing like a motherfucker is never done in vain. So here's a little plug. In the class I'm teaching tomorrow, I'm going to take all these high-minded words and turn them into practical strategies to make your writing powerful. I think the subhead that I wrote on my PowerPoint, which I hate PowerPoints, but I wrote how to make writing that people sit up and say, damn. So you can tell it's already an A+ PowerPoint. So that's what I'm going to be talking about, taking all these high-minded ideas and turning them into strategies. But I want to acknowledge that sometimes we write and we write and we write, and it feels like nobody is listening. I've been feeling like that lately. I feel like I have been writing a lot, just to be personal. I've been writing a lot about the Test Iowa initiative and the problems with that. And I sometimes just feel like I have been screaming into a void. I've been having dreams that different people will show up at my door and tell me to stop writing about it. Don't worry, I'm in therapy. It's okay. But it's it's intense. And sometimes it feels like you're trying to say something and nobody's listening. And it seems like no matter what you do or say, you can never relinquish the firm grip of the idiot as it steers our disaster ship. But in those moments, I think it's important to know that other people are listening. The change is not linear. It happens in moments like we're God's creating tiny bursts of light, little stars that gather together until there's a constellation. Today on Twitter, a woman DM'd me to say that the writer who changed her world was Mary Oliver, her book, The Journey. She said, sometimes writing changes the world by helping us feel less alone, so we stick around long enough to do the work to change. And I love that she said that. It makes so much sense to me. So we know we won't win every battle. We know we won't always see the change we want to see, but I think it's important that we find the spaces and the stories that sustain us so that we stick around long enough to do the work. I want to end with a quote from one of my new favorite writers and somebody who I'll talk a lot about tomorrow in the class. It is Molly Ivins. Since the last time I was here, I became a columnist for the local paper. And in doing so, I get a little obsessive about research. And so I was like, I'm going to read every single Pulitzer Prize columnist that ever was invented by the Lord Jesus Christ, and I will read them. And I did. And and then I read Molly Ivins, who was nominated for a Pulitzer. Did she win? Oh God, now I'm going to say something wrong. And now it's recorded, and everybody will know I was wrong forever. But I own 3 of her books now. I'm obsessed with her, and there's something that she wrote that maybe you've all heard before, but it's something that I am trying to do a lot these days. She wrote, So keep fighting for freedom and justice, beloveds, but don't forget to have fun doing it. Be outrageous, rejoice in all the oddities freedom can produce, and when you get through celebrating the sheer joy of a good fight, be sure to tell those who came after how much fun it was. All right, that's me talk, and I think that we'll take some questions. Hopefully that wasn't too boring. I feel like it was like the world's longest dramatic monologue, and I'm not going to get the part. So, but let's take some questions.
Give it up for Lyz, everybody. Snaps or claps or whatever you could do. Lyz, you got the part for sure. You get all the parts.
I hope it's Ophelia in him.
Definitely, 100%.
Doesn't she only have like 4 lines? Isn't it like the most garbage part ever?
You know, I should know this because my partner was just in a production of Hamlet last year, but I think maybe more than that, but maybe it depends on the adaptation or the production. I don't know. But thank you, Lyz. That was so great and so moving. It's so encouraging. I think we could all use a little more encouragement right now, or need a little bit of encouragement, even if we're getting. I hope you're all getting it. Yeah, we could open up the questions. Sarah, do you have something? I've got things, but I don't know if I should go first. Again, if you just came in late or anything, please post your questions in the chat, and we'll sort of like relay those on, please.
Yeah, ask me anything. It doesn't have to be about writing. You could ask me about my sourdough starter. I don't have one.
I think you and I might be the only people who don't. I'm learning so much about sourdough starter these days.
You know how long it takes to make bread?
Okay,
Do you know how long it takes to make bread?
At one dark point in my life, like 2 months ago, I was Googling sourdough starter because I was like, I'm going to do it. And then I was like, this is like science. I don't want
to. It's very science. Yeah, no doubt about it.
Like when I got to step 20, I was like, I'm out. I can't do that. But
sure.
Okay.
So we do have a question for you.
Okay.
How are you staying productive in the COVID landscape?
Okay. Good question. So what I want to tell you is that I'm not productive and that things are horrible and I'm just languishing on a couch. I wish. The reality is, if I don't write, I don't eat, and I can't feed my kids. So that's really a lot of what motivates me. We went from, and I'm being a little flippant, but we went from covering the caucuses to a pandemic, and I was also I turned in. So my second book comes out August 11th. I turned that in October, and so I was working through the caucuses. I was working on edits. We did 4 rounds of edits, so I would cover caucus events during the day, go home, stay up until 2 a.m. working on book edits. And so I was already pretty much emotionally and physically done in February. And then I got a couple weeks, and then March hit. And I also, another thing I did was I had said that I would do an Audible original project, which was due May 1st. And yeah, and so then the pandemic hit, and then everything started, and then I was supposed to be doing this project for which I needed the money from that project. I couldn't just not do it. I have 2 kids to feed, I'm a single mom, and God, I will tell you, I like those, if you go back and look at the Gazette, those first couple of columns that I wrote in the pandemic, I was like, I don't know what to say. Like, I think one of them, I talk about like empty, like running in the empty streets. You know what? My motto for my work is, it's not all going to be winners. So I stayed productive because I had to be productive, because I had to turn in stuff. But I'm not, I don't like that as a model of being. I don't like it as a model of doing. It's really hard. And I know everybody's like, well, where you still have a job? Fair. fair, but I think all of our difficulties have just been difficult, right? There's no sliding scale, but that's how I've been staying productive, because if I don't write, I don't eat. And truly, it's an incredible motivator. I had a writing professor tell me one time, and I think about this a lot. She was like, for all the tweets you send and all the blogs you write, she was like, if you just put those on paper, you'd have a moderately coherent book by the end of like 2 months. And I mean, it was kind of a dig, but she was also not wrong. So I do think a lot about that too, how sometimes the energy that we expend in one place, we can just conserve it and expend it in another. So I am still getting writing done, but no laundry is getting done. My house is a mess. I'm not cooking. Everybody's making pies and shit in pandemic. I'm living off of veggie burgers that I microwave, and I'm happy. But that was a long answer.
That's a fantastic answer, though. Yeah, all over this country, I think there are mountains of laundry accumulating. Probably at the expense of some of those pies that are getting made, I'm betting.
Yeah,
cool, but you know.
And my kids have been, I mean, it's kind of different because I worked from home when they were little, and then they went to school, and now they were not in school. And so they got to see like real firsthand. I'd be like, no, mommy's working, no, mommy's working, you know. And the bad part of my personality is I can get really obsessive and like just tunnel in on something. So, to the detriment of the people who I love in my relationship. Don't worry, I'm in therapy. It's
fine. Speaking of, we have a question from Elaine. Just wondering if you have any insights you achieved in therapy influenced your writing. If so, how?
So funny. Such a good question in a way that is. So I'm a Sagittarius, and that means that I am very uncomfortable with emotion. That's what people say now. We just use our star signs to excuse the crappy parts of our personalities. But yeah, so I've been in therapy for a very long time, in and out, different therapists. I think when I was in college, I had a really hard time. I had written about this before, but that's when I found out that one of my sisters had been sexually assaulted several times over the course of several years, and it was by a family member, and it was a really hard time. And so a gift that a professor gave me then was, here's the mental health services office, go there. And so that was like one of the greatest gifts a teacher has ever given to me. And shout out for teachers everywhere and professors. But so seeing a few, but I'll say recently, the one who I've been seeing these past, 3-4 years now, is something that she keeps telling me is that you can't be too much. I often experience, I often feel like I'm like too loud, right? Like I'm too much. Like I'll go in the room, like I'll wear a yellow jumpsuit on a Zoom call, or oh, this is a good story. The last time in the before times, one of the last events I did was I went and saw one of my favorite writers read at Prairie Lights, went out with her and some other friends afterwards, and ended up screaming at everybody about how much I hated Michael Bloomberg. And so then I'll have deep sense of shame after that. I still hate him, but we don't have to hate him anymore because there's so many more other people to hate now. What a relief. But so I'll go to her and I'll just bring her these scenarios where I'm like, oh no, I should apologize. And she's always just being like, you can't be too much. You cannot be too much. And so I think about that with my writing a lot too. There's often the tendency to pull back, to hold back. And I heard this put in like writing language once. It's like, put all your good stuff in at, the first draft. Don't hold it back for the second. Put all your good stuff in right away. And so I think about that too when I'm like very practically when I'm writing. Good stuff goes on top. The weird shit goes on top. The funny lines, they go up top because you want to get people in and get people excited, and it's not too much, and you can never be too much. So that's something that I learned in therapy, but I do apply it very practically to my writing. Like literally, if I'm editing something, I'll be like, oh, that's a good line. I'll be like, move it up.
That is awesome advice. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah.
Sarah, I think you got another one.
Yeah. One of our participants has asked, when you, assuming that you do read the opinions of people who disagree with you and want to yell at you about it on the internet, how do you keep your cool? How do you manage?
By being funny. I mean, I know that sounds like oh, I'm so funny. No, so I have a rule, and I can always judge how well I'm doing on any given day, depending on if I violate this rule. But here's my rule: I don't reply to mean tweets or this will go to your thing in a second, but this is like things that are directly sent to me. I don't reply to that stuff unless I can do so in one funny line, like just a quick dunk, or so I don't even do it unless I can do one sentence and it's funny. And the level for funny is it funny to me? It's a really low bar. It's a real low bar. So I try to I feel like humor is a great buffer, for that, to help me keep from taking things very personally. I violate this rule often, and that's what I was saying. Sometimes I know I'm having a bad day if I start to reply to something and then start going, and I'm like, oh, back off, you're violating your rule. Sometimes I press send anyway because screw you. But I do try to keep an emotional space there, right? And I use humor to make that buffer. I try to find the absurdity in it. And we'll talk about this in the class tomorrow, but I do think one of the best ways of handling disagreement and finding space or pointing out how stupid someone else is being is by highlighting the absurdity of it, and by finding ways to do that where you can clearly articulate just the stupidity of something, right? And so so yes, I do read a lot of people who I don't agree with online. I follow a lot of people I don't agree with. I work with people I don't agree with all the time, and I find that it might be shocking, but I DM people I disagree with and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? I think this. Am I wrong here? I do try to do that as a learning exercise, and to recognize that I don't know everything. I'm very new to writing about Iowa politics, so there's a lot of space there, a lot of characters here I'm just learning about. And y'all, it's weird. Our elected state house reps, they're wild, and we just don't talk about it. And I'm so it's so fun to me, but we have this pandemic we have to talk about first before we can start talking about how stupid everybody is. But yeah, so I try, but when that's kind of, those are some ways I handle it. I learn as much as I can. I use humor as a buffer, but also I get really fucking pissed a lot, and I think that's fine. I think it's fine to be angry. I think when you see stupidity, when you see cruelty, people are cruel. And some of these politics, it's not just a war of ideas. People are dying, and I get pissed, and I think it's okay to get pissed, and I think we should. If we are not angry when we see blatant cruelty, then you're the one that has the problem. So yeah. So how do I handle it? Not very well, but those are the strategies I use.
Yeah, no, that it's got to be hard. And something that you said in your talk too about or when you were talking about your professor that said if you just took everything that you were writing on Twitter, you have a semi-coherent book, that focusing of energy. It's so much energy just to do positive things on social media and in that space. It's if you're trying to do this writing thing or the kind of writing that you do, that all has to be so much more exhausting and distracting and problematic in a lot of ways.
It is. And I think one of the things that I'm learning is, or that I have to keep learning, is you can only do your thing, and that's not to excuse inaction. You should be doing a thing. You should be doing work, but you have to change the things that are within your power to change. And so I think sometimes when I get really overwhelmed and really frustrated, it's just realizing like you have to do what you have to do. My friend Gia Tolentino, kind of in somebody, I heard somebody ask her a similar question, and she said, she writes for the New Yorker and also like well researched, but also opiniony kind of stuff. And she says cultural criticism is what they call it. That's the right term for it. But she says, she's like, you don't have to have an opinion about everything, but the things that you have an opinion about, make them good. Like you don't need to wade into every fight. Not every fight was made for your voice, but the ones that you weigh into, make sure you go in all the way. And I'm paraphrasing her, but yeah, I think about that. Like not every fight needs my voice, but the fights that I have need me 100%, or they're going to get me 100% because I don't do halfway. So
Yeah, right on. That's great. We got a couple more questions. This one was from Lisa. How do you distinguish between the good shit and to include in the first draft and self-exploitation by oversharing, or is oversharing a myth?
Yeah, I don't know. I tend to just put it all in and then try to pull back. I wonder, I guess when you think about like self-exploitation, that's interesting. Like I can think of examples of like editors taking a story and exploiting it for cheap clickbait, right? And telling a writer, oh no, this is good, and not preparing them for the absolute internet dunking that they're gonna get, right? And that's a kind of exploitation. I think that's what happened to me in college. It was like very early, throw somebody in, make them write something that everybody's gonna hate, but do it so you can, get rid of papers. Like, so I see that. But as far as self-exploitation, I feel like if you're saying I need to say this, I don't know why you wouldn't want to say it. I mean, I can understand why you wouldn't want to say it. You might not want to bleed all over the page, but if it's something you need to say it. Somebody asked me once about like, oh, do you feel like you have to be personal? Because I'm a female writer and I have children, and so people, and I write on the internet. So, and I often write very personally, and so people are like, oh, do you feel pressure to be personal? And I feel like maybe I did in the beginning, but now I'm just personal because everything's personal. That's just who I want to be. I don't feel pressure. I can say no. Now I have the luxury of saying no to things. But I like being personal because I feel like more people should be personal. And maybe instead of telling women to be less personal, we should be telling men to be more personal. And maybe that's who has a problem. I don't think I answered your question, but I guess I just don't think of it as self-exploitation. But that is interesting. I'm going to think about that a little bit longer. I feel like that deserves a smarter answer than what I gave it. I just yelled about men. Pivot.
No, that's cool. I mean, yeah, I would totally agree with that. And it seems like a couple of like Casey Lamone that you mentioned earlier, I feel like is a good example of someone who's doing that. So if people are looking for men who are doing that work out there, there's definitely
so good. One of the best books I've read. Just being personal. I think we all need to be a little bit more personal about where we're coming from and why we are in the places we are, because that veneer of objectivity, and this is part of the cultural discussions we've been having for a while, but the veneer of objectivity is really only granted to white men, right? And who is allowed to be objective and who isn't is really more of a cultural construction than it is an actual reality. And so I think just continuing to pull that down. And instead of telling other writers to be less, I think we should tell other writers to be more. And I feel like if you ever feel like you're too much on the page, like just let go of it. Be outrageous. Put it all out there. I wrote a profile of Tucker Carlson and talked about my divorce the whole time. Like, and a very serious media critic like asked me about that in an interview, and thank God it was like pre-recorded, because he was like, did you feel like that might have been too messy? And I was like, do you feel like that might have been too judgmental? And that like got cut out of the interview, which thank God, because I don't like, God bless, he wasn't trying to pick a fight, but I wasn't gonna let him get away with it. He was like, oh yeah, you're right. I'm sad. And then, you know, but I was like, fuck off. I'm gonna write about what I want.
Amen to that. Sarah, I think you got a question.
Yeah, Misty asked a question. Mm-hmm. She said, I love Godland and I can't wait for Belabored. I'm interested in how you choose which projects will become books, which projects will become essays.
That's such like, that sounds like I have so much luxury. Here's how they both became, and I feel like other people have had my classes before, maybe this is a new group, but might know this story. But like back in 2015, I was trying to sell a book called The Women I Was Supposed to Be. And it was like about religion and femininity and motherhood. And it's a really good book. It's gonna be turned into something else. That's the next project that I hope to do whenever I sleep. I need to sleep. But I was trying to sell this book and nobody wanted to buy it, because in 2015 everybody was like, nobody cares about religion. Sad trombone, because what happened next year. But but I had two things happen kind of at the same time. I had a editor who had read the proposal for The Women We Were Supposed to Be and said, I like this. I can't sell it to my publisher, but I like your writing. And she was reading a series that I was writing for a site called Jezebel at the time. And she was like, this should be a book, because I was writing about motherhood and myths and how weird and fucked up everything was. She was like, that should be a book. And so we talked about it, and together we turned it into a book. And that book is like, that's Belabored. And that's very much a collaboration with her. And I'll come back to that one in a second. But then around early 2016, I'd written an article about what it means that people don't go to church anymore, and that all these churches across the Midwest are closing up. And I was arguing that instead of making people less religious, it was making people more nostalgic, and that would impact our politics. And it was my one good take of 2016. And the article did really well, and I had another editor contact me and say, this should be a book. So both of those things kind of happened within a couple months of each other. So I did something I probably shouldn't have done, was I signed 2 book deals in a year, and they were very small, and I did not make a lot of money. But that's kind of how those became projects. And I think the one was really easy to write. Godland, I wrote it in this fast fury because I'd done like years of research, and then like wrote it all in like a month. And I was like, oh, I can't remember writing it. Belabored was like putting needles into my eye. Like every word felt like a little tiny stab to the most vulnerable parts of me. And I remember every single word. I almost didn't write that book too, because it was so hard. Because when I sold that book, I was married, mother of 2, with a boy and a girl. And I had a mom blog. And then by the time I sat down to write it, I was divorced and couldn't afford food. And everything was a mess, you know? So I was like, I'm not even that same person anymore. And then my editor was like, then just write that. She's like, just write all that. And I was like, so yeah. So how do you decide what gets to be a book? I think really good advice that same writing professor who told me that if I just stopped tweeting and put it in a Word document, I'd have a book, So good. AJ Verdell, wonderful writer. Her book, The Good Negress, is a wonderful, it's really beautiful what she does with words and language and tense and anything. She's great. But she had said the thing you need to write is the thing you can stick with the longest. Because you're in it. I mean, books take a really long time to write, and then you have to edit them, and that's how they get you, because that's really hard. I can pump out a first crappy draft of literally anything, but like to edit it and then to be confronted with the crap that I've written is like peeling skin off of my face. It hurts. It physically hurts me. I'm so dramatic, and I am just telling you my heart truth right now. But like it hurts. And so I think like that's the thing. If it's so in you that you have to say it, you have to say it. Just say it, and say it for as long and as hard as you need to say it. That's why I think my third book is one that I haven't sold. I mean, let's calm down. Maybe it never will sold, but that's what I'm really excited about. The potential for this third book is because something I have been thinking about for a long time, and I am like, I won't let it go. So yeah. Also,
rock and
people
roll.
buy it. Yeah, and then the publisher has to buy it, and they have to be interested in it. But that's such like a weird game too, because like, when I was trying to sell my books, literally nobody wanted anything, and now people are like, oh, what's your next project? I'm like, ooh, sorry. I'm sorry for giving y'all a finger. Like, it just feels so weird. Like I was talking with this writer who has this great idea for her second book. And, I was like, this is so good. And she's like, nobody wants to buy it. And I was like, oh, it's weird. It's hard to sell things. And don't take it personally. Just write what you have to write.
Cool. I thought my mic was not on. I apologize. Since you've gained some media attention, you've been written about by others a few times as, the woman who famous man interacted with. But you are also a human with opinions and expertise. So how do you respond to that?
I don't know. I don't know. I think it's only in the past. Sarah and Ryan, you know me a little longer. It's only like in the past, 2 years that I'm like a character, right? And that happened, I mean, I've been writing for a long time in relative obscurity while changing diapers, and just nobody wanted to publish my stuff. And so I wrote a blog, and and now I kind of feel like I'm in this space where people like care what I think and care what I do and care what I say in a way that is kind of I mean, it's kind of cool, but it's also a little upsetting. like I'm not that important, y'all. So I don't know how I handle it. I think I'm learning. That's something that my therapist also said, was that when I was having a really hard time, I think after I moderated this LGBTQ forum back in October or September, and had an interaction with Joe Biden that went viral, and the attention generated out of that really scared me. And that was also the same weekend I had to turn in a draft of Belabored, and so I literally moderated the forum, handed all my social media logins to my friends, went underground, and when I resurfaced on Monday, my employer was like, CNN wanted me to be on there. My employer was getting like death threats. 3 weeks later, I was getting bomb threats. And MSNBC wanted me on, and I remember like getting so overwhelmed and talking to my therapist. I was like, I don't know how to be this person that people think that I am. I am that person, but also I'm not, and so I just was like, and she was like, this is what she said. She goes, you'll level up. And I was like, excuse me? And she goes, you'll figure it out. You'll level up, because this is how life works. It throws you a challenge. You meet it. You exceed it. You level up. And that's what I love her. But I think about that a lot now, where when things happen, or somebody will write about me or something, or somebody will say something, good or bad. It can, both are very overwhelming. The good stuff is actually even more overwhelming, because it's like, the bad stuff, it's like, oh, thank God. You know, I was raised Baptist, so I think I suck all the time. It makes sense to me. But when people are like, she's good, I'm like, ooh. But I do think about that I think that these things happen, or sometimes they don't happen. And then that's also anxiety inducing too, because it's like, I did all this stuff, nobody's paying attention. That I just think that like life is long and complicated, and that you learn to rise to meet each challenge. And then the next time something like that happens, then you know. And something that I try to do is, when I see other people then experiencing things that I've experienced, is reaching out and being like, hey, can I take your social media logins? Hey, here's how I dealt with hate. You know, here's the things that I've learned to do. And I think that, you just kind of learn as you go. And I don't know if there's really a good way of doing it or being it, other than just doing and being. So I don't know. What's weird?
No, that's right on.
I think leveling up is.
Yeah, I think about that. And then when the hard stuff happens, I think, guys, this is so crazy. But this is what I think now. I think I'm Lyz Lenz. I can level up. Like, and so like when, you know, if somebody's like, over the caucuses, I had a couple articles do really well, did a bunch of media, and they were overwhelming, but I'd be like, oh, like BBC wants me to come talk about like Elizabeth Warren's policy initiatives. I'm Lyz Lenz. I'm level up. You know what I mean? Like, I will just like, it's just like, okay, let's do it. Let's just have the confidence that any man in my position would have, and just go for it.
Yeah. Real talk.
Real talk.
I am glad that you are I'm glad that you are Lyz Lenz, and I am glad that you are in those spaces, and it's so great. Especially with the caucuses and everything, and the Daily Show stuff.
I forgot.
The Daily Show. Yeah.
Well, I was on. I was on the Daily Show. That's right. I was going to correct you and be like, no, I wasn't on the Daily Show. I was.
Yeah, they did like an Iowa caucus special, right?
Yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's great. Your voice should be there. Your thinking should be heard in those spaces. And as someone who's been reading your work for a long time, I couldn't be happier every time I see that.
Thank you.
It's happy to tune in.
I think everybody's voices and opinions should be heard except Ben Shapiro's. That's it.
Yes.
He's the only one.
Having had a couple of Turning Point USA students students who are members of Turning Point USA in my classes, and seeing how they've tried to steer the conversation, they've been well coached and not well coached at the same time, I think.
You know, that was like proto my homeschool experience. Was like they would like coach you in like how to fight with a liberal and stuff. I went to a whole camp once that trained me how to fight with liberal professors, and I came out being like, I don't know, liberal professors sound real rad. I don't think that. Anyway, but yeah, that's like this, like the seeds were there. Ben Shapiro's just, another gross head on a disgusting beast. So.
No doubt about that. Well, I don't see any more questions. I don't know if anyone has any more questions. Maybe post it real quick, because Lyz has other things. She has children to be with.
They're not here right now. No.
Well, in that case,
my friend and drink a beer.
Cool. If you want to post something in the chat, that would be great. We'll give it another minute. I saw one question that was sort of general about Lyz's workshop tomorrow. Is it still available to register? Yes, 100%. You can go to our website. I posted a link in the chat, so you can check that out. You don't need to pay the registration fee if you're just going to Lyz's class. So just scroll down a bit. The PayPal link for that is down the page a little bit. If you have any problems with that, just let us know. But yeah, obviously it's a class that you should take. Uh, if you haven't learned anything else tonight, you probably learned that. But I think you
We'll talk
probably learned
about
something
steel
else.
magnolias.
Nice.
We do have another question for you.
Okay, take it away.
What things do you have to include in your writing that you think are indispensable for curating a readership?
I think personality and voice and perspective. I think people like to follow personalities, and I like to follow personalities. I think that, everybody has a personality and a voice and perspective. It's just about how do you communicate that to the rest of the world. How do you present that, and how do you find your space? And I think that I think I think that, and so I think when you're thinking about your writing, rather than how you present your writing and yourself, when you're thinking about your writing, just think about like, what do I bring to this topic that other people don't? Because I've talked about this in classes before, but like, everybody's written about something. Like everybody's probably already written about the thing you've written about. So what is it that you bring? Do you bring humor? Um, do you also draw? Like, it doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be what do you bring to this conversation that imbues what you're saying with your personality. And that's very different for everybody. Like I'll say dinguses in my writing. It's not groundbreaking. Like it's not real smart. But I think that's like, when I think about my writing and when I think about when I do it, the things that I know are good for me to say and good for me to write is when I can think about that topic and find that voice, that's like sarcastic or, a little bit sharp. And so that's when I'm like, okay, this is my space, because the thing I have to say about it is, fits there. Not everything I write does. I often make mistakes, especially I think as a working writer. You write and you write, and sometimes they're duds. But I'm just gonna trash my own writing. Thank you for coming. But yeah, so I think that's what you have to include in your writing, is that thing, and it's different for everybody. But yeah, but I think you'll find it, and you probably already know it.
Right on. Right on. Thank you so much, Liz. Again, tomorrow around noon, or at noon, maybe a couple minutes after, once everybody gets logged in and stuff. Well, we there's a class for the conference that ends right at noon, so there'll probably be a little bit of changeover. But if you're not registered, register. If you're not reading Liz in the Gazette, what are you doing? Definitely need to do that immediately. Such an essential voice, especially in this part of the world, especially in Iowa, which is having more challenges than it usually does right now, I think. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being part of this conference again this year. We're so grateful, and we so appreciate you. And this was fantastic. Thank you, Liz, so much.
Thank you. Thank you all for logging in. I truly thought like nobody was going to log in, so thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good night. We'll see if you're going to the conference. We'll see you tomorrow. Otherwise, tune in, same bat time, same bat channel tomorrow. We'll be doing the faculty reading with Rebecca Wee, Felicia Schneiderhan, Misty Urban, and Callie Van Bali. So come check it out. It'll be great. We'll see you all then. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.